Hey, Darkness here. I'm working on a brand new episode of Unexplained Encounters as we speak. Sorry it's taking so long. I've been getting these insane headaches lately. For now, please enjoy nearly 2 hours of new scary outdoors stories from my podcast, Alone in the Woods. These are AI narrated by my voice clone, just a heads up. By the way, check out creepycampfirestories.com. It's a new hype page where you can check out my brand new book, Creepy Campfire Stories. Pre-order it on Amazon to help me reach 2,500 pre-orders before July 8th, 2025. Verify your pre-order to try to get in on the first 100 verifications to get a Darkness Prevails plushie, and even check in with your email to see if you can win an Amazon gift card to get the book. That's creepycampfirestories.com. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Welcome back to Alone in the Woods. I'm Darkness Prevails, and in this episode, you'll hear chilling accounts of mysterious figures, eerie encounters, and the kind of fear that stays with you long after the campfire has burned out. If you've had your own unsettling experience in the wild, I'd love to hear it. Share your story at darkstories.org, or go to eeriecast.com/outdoor, and it might be featured in a future episode. And don't forget to leave a rating or review on Apple or Spotify. Your support helps us bring more terrifying tales to light. Now, throw a log on the fire, because the night is still young. Cub Scout Stalker, from Anonymous. I have a pretty creepy story that happened in the summer of 1998. I was 11 at the time, just old enough to join the local Cub Scout pack, and excited about being allowed to go on proper campouts with my best friends, Garrett and Tay-Tay. I remember how things felt at the start of 1998. My mom and dad were working extra hours to cover bills, so the news that I could join some weekend scouting trips was a welcome relief for them. "It'll keep you out of the house," Dad joked. "You'll learn some new skills too." Garrett was my best friend since kindergarten. He had a slight lisp and wore his hair in a messy bowl cut. He wasn't athletic, neither of us really were. But he had a quick sense of humor and a knack for noticing small details. Tay-Tay, on the other hand, was new to our friend circle. His real name was Taylor, but our class ended up calling him Tay-Tay. He stood a solid few inches taller than either of us, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and read more than any kid I'd ever met. He joined scouting around the same time, and since we all liked the same kind of books and cartoons, we became a little trio. Before that summer, our biggest concerns were whether the cafeteria pizza would be edible, or which comic books we'd trade. Once the Cub Scout pack leader announced we'd be doing 2 major weekend outings in May and June, we could hardly contain our excitement. The plan was simple. The first camp would be near a small lake on the outskirts of our county. The second was higher up in the woods near a rocky ridge. That was the one we'd been looking forward to most. It had rumors of hidden waterfalls and lookout points. We didn't know it then, but that second location was also where we'd first spot the man who would haunt our summer. We arrived at the lake in late May. The sun was warm, the breeze carried the smell of water, and the campsite was filled with families and kids running around, giggling as they helped set up tents. Since it was a Cub Scout event, there were adult volunteers all over, moms and dads who pitched in, plus our den leader, Mr. Simon. That weekend was everything I'd hoped for. We roasted hot dogs, told ghost stories by the campfire, and even practiced some canoeing. But on the second evening, Garrett and I took a walk by the small dock, just before dinner. Tay-Tay had gone back to our tent to grab a sweater. That's when we saw him, the older guy in a ragged brown jacket and worn jeans. He stood just beyond the boundary of the campsite, near the tree line, staring out at the water. At first, I figured he might be someone's dad, but there was something unsettling about how he kept his gaze fixed on us. Garrett nudged me. "Do you know him?" I shook my head. "Maybe he's with another troop." But the longer we stood there, the less likely that felt. He made no move to speak with any adults, nor did he wear anything resembling a scout leader's uniform. After a few moments, he vanished into the woods, leaving Garrett and me uneasy. We didn't mention it to Mr. Simon at the time. It wasn't exactly illegal for someone to be near a public lake. Still, that night, both Garrett and I were more anxious than usual, as if we expected to see that shape again. But the rest of that weekend passed without issue. Tay-Tay teased us when we told him about the man. He joked that maybe we'd watched too many crime shows. That was that, or so we thought. About 2 weeks later, the second event rolled around, a camping trip up by the rocky ridge. This place was more isolated than the lake, with thick woods and a small cliff overlooking a gorge. The first day went well. We set up tents in a clearing, each tent assigned to 2 boys. I shared with Garrett, while Tay-Tay bunked with a kid named Martin. By sunset, the main activity was telling jokes by the fire, while Mr. Simon taught us how to use a compass and read topographic maps. Come nighttime, though, a new tension crept in. The wind was stronger at that elevation, and the moonlight filtered in through tall pines. We turned in around 9 p.m., tired from the day's hike. Garrett fell asleep fast, but I stayed up listening to the rustling leaves. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, light, cautious, moving between the tents. At first, I thought it was just an adult volunteer checking in, but then I heard a zipper open on someone's gear bag, followed by a quick shuffle. My heart sped up. Who would be messing with our stuff at this hour? I was too scared to unzip our tent and look out. Instead, I lay there, heart thumping, until the footsteps faded. In the morning, Tay-Tay was furious that his flashlight went missing. Another scout said his canteen was gone too. Nobody knew who took them. Mr. Simon chalked it up to raccoons or some mischievous older scout. But that explanation didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Raccoons don't usually unzip bags, and specifically take flashlights. As the morning passed, Garrett and I found footprints in the soft dirt behind Tay-Tay's tent. Large, adult size, pressed deep enough to show the pattern of worn-out soles. It reminded me of the man at the lake. I shared my suspicions with Garrett. We both felt uneasy, but weren't sure how to raise the issue without sounding paranoid. The day's activities involved hiking to a lookout point near the cliff. This was supposed to be a highlight, a panoramic view of the valley. We split into smaller groups with adult chaperones to ensure no one got lost. Our group included me, Garrett, Tay-Tay, and Martin, along with a volunteer parent named Mr. Llewellyn. The hike was fun at first, plenty of jokes and a sense of accomplishment. But halfway there, Tay-Tay stopped short. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" Martin asked, looking around. Tay-Tay pointed into the trees. "Thought I saw someone moving." Mr. Llewellyn scouted ahead, saw nothing, and reassured us we were safe. But I noticed Tay-Tay's face, pale with worry. I believed him. Given what I'd seen and heard the night before, it wasn't hard to guess who it might be. My stomach twisted. By the time we reached the cliff, we'd almost forgotten about the figure in the woods. The view was incredible. We could see miles of forest, the thin ribbon of a road, and small patches of farmland. The scouts spread out, under the watchful eye of Mr. Llewellyn, to take in the sights. Garrett stayed near me, fidgeting with his camera. Tay-Tay drifted off with Martin, trying to get better photos. Moments later, we heard a panicked yell. Everyone turned. Garrett was gone, but his voice echoed from behind some boulders near the cliff edge. I sprinted, heart in my throat, weaving around the rocks. That's when I saw the older man. The same ragged figure from the lake, standing uncomfortably close to Garrett. He had a hand outstretched, almost as if he was grabbing or shoving, though I couldn't see clearly. Garrett was half turned away, on the edge of the cliff, eyes wide with terror. I shouted. Everything happened fast. Garrett tried to pull away from the man and lost his footing. He fell backward, hitting the rocky slope below. I heard his scream, followed by a sickening thud. My heart nearly stopped. The man whipped around to face me, and our eyes met for a split second. His expression was something I can only describe as cold, like a predator annoyed at being caught mid-hunt. Then he bolted into the trees. Mr. Llewellyn and a few other scouts arrived seconds later. We rushed to where Garrett lay, about 10 feet down on a rocky ledge. He was conscious but trembling, gripping his left arm at an odd angle. Blood trickled from a scrape on his forehead. We helped him back up carefully, and Mr. Llewellyn radioed for help. The rest of the day was a blur. We had to half-carry Garrett back to camp. An ambulance came, and he was taken to the nearest hospital with a broken arm, plus bruises across his side. The police got involved, scouring the area for the man I described. But they never found him. At least, not that summer. When the scouts regrouped to talk about it, Tay-Tay said he'd glimpsed the man earlier, lurking behind a tree, possibly stalking us. Some scouts admitted they'd seen a strange figure around camp, but never thought much of it. Mr. Simon felt responsible. He canceled the remainder of the camping trip, loaded everyone into vans, and we headed home the next morning. Garrett stayed in the hospital for a couple of days. When I visited, his arm was in a cast, and he was more withdrawn than ever. I tried asking him what exactly happened up on that cliff, if the man had said anything or tried to grab him, but Garrett wouldn't talk about it. His eyes flickered with a fear I'd never seen before. He changed the subject to cartoons or asked about other people. We never had a real conversation about it. Over the years, that day cast a shadow on our friendship. Garrett grew distant, and though we stayed in touch through middle school, it was never the same. We'd mention the man in hushed tones, mostly when we were sure no one else could hear. Tay-Tay tried doing some detective work, found no official reports that matched the man's description. It was as if he vanished into the woods, never to resurface. I sometimes think about how that summer of 1998 was supposed to be my grand Cub Scout experience. Friendship, campfires, silly jokes. Instead, it turned into a story I rarely share in full. Adults often brushed it off as some drifter or dangerous trespasser. But deep down, I suspect it was more than that. The way he stalked us, how he took the items at night, and cornered Garrett at the cliff. It felt intentional, predatory. Garrett's broken arm healed, but he never went camping again, at least not with the scouts. Tay-Tay and I tried a few more outings in later years, but a certain unease always lingered after dark. It changed the way we looked at the woods, at shadows behind trees, at the idea that not every adult out there is a caring chaperone. Sometimes a stranger is more than just a face in the crowd. We never did find closure. The man wasn't caught or even properly identified. Every once in a while, I wonder if he's still out there in some other place, haunting some other group of campers who don't suspect a thing. Whenever I think of 1998, I recall the crisp scent of pine, the crackle of a campfire, and the rustling of footsteps at midnight. Above all, I remember the terror in Garrett's eyes, and how that single summer changed us in ways we never wanted. The full account of the creature stalking me in California. From Jessam123. My name is Jesse. I live in Sacramento, California. I had an encounter of huge proportion with an unknown creature. I was spending some time with an elderly friend in Stockton, California. It was a week before Christmas. I had done my duties as a caregiver there. It was getting late and very cold. It was around 3:10 a.m. when I said my goodbyes and began to drive my little white car away from the trailer park area. Suddenly, fog began to envelop me, so dense that I could not see 10 feet in front of me. But I wasn't worried yet. I heard what sounded like footsteps ahead of me. I did not pay attention at first, but considering the time, I mostly just dismissed it as a tired thought. I rolled down the driver's side window for some fresh air to come in as I drove. Suddenly, I noticed someone in black running on the side of the road. I was surprised. I could hardly see due to the fog, but I thought in the moment, who could be out so early in the morning, dressed in black and running on the side of the road in this dense fog? Curiosity began to take over. I needed to take a look. Suddenly, a stench of death and decay came into my window. I wanted to gag. It was like rotting meat. Dread and fear started overtaking my curiosity. By then, I was driving next to the thing. Its legs were taller than my car. It was hairy, very hairy, black in color. It was keeping up with me at 40 miles per hour. It grabbed my side mirror with a huge set of claws, about 2 inches long, and it had hairy arms. It bent down to show its face. Oh my God, its face was the stuff that nightmares are made of. Its eyes were a glowing orange. It had no snout, 2 skeletal slits for a nose, and its mouth. I am trembling while I am typing this. Its mouth had a horrifying smile, showing 2 rows of sharp teeth, ear to ear. The teeth were about as long as its claws. It was mocking me, as if saying, "You are my dinner tonight." I sped to 65 miles per hour. It still was catching up to me. I started screaming like a child who had just seen the boogeyman. No, not this way. I don't want to die this way, eaten by this monster. I now was speeding at 80 and still accelerating. It was still keeping up, all the while smiling at me, mocking me. I was crying and about to soil myself. Then it suddenly let go of the mirror and skidded into a walnut orchard, where it then disappeared into the dark. I kept on going and didn't slow down until I made it to the highway. I was thankful that I did not crash or hurt anyone at the speed I was going. My adrenaline surely helped me survive this ordeal. A few miles ahead, there was a woman waving on the side of the freeway. Her car lost power. I stopped, not because of being a good Samaritan, but fearing she would be encountering that thing, and her death would be on my conscience. I had a charge box in my car, took it out, opened her hood, started it, and told her to leave the area quickly, and that I'd seen a large animal nearby. That was probably a bear. She looked at me kind of funny, got in her car, and took off. I did as well. This encounter I share with you is true. The fog began to disappear. The stench was gone also. I calmed down a little as I drove. But I tell you all, be careful when driving out in the fog. Be aware of red flags of things out of place, and drive safely when the fog comes out. Don't let curiosity get you killed. On March 28th, 2020, I had another run-in with the creature here in Stockton. I fear it is hunting me, mocking me, telling me that my time is almost up. I was at the trailer park with my elderly friend, who we will call Bill. We were sitting on the small porch, talking and drinking hot tea. It was raining. Let me give you a layout of the place here first, before I start my encounter. He resides on the outer edge of the trailer park, 15 miles away from my first encounter, on the outskirts. Behind his house, he had a small barn and a tool shed where he keeps his lawn tools, and the barn is where he keeps his run-down old car he uses to drive for groceries. His trailer is a double-wide with very small windows, except for the one in the entrance, which was at least 3 feet by 4 feet. We were sitting in front of it on the porch. I asked him, "Hey Bill, where are all the cats? There used to be a lot of cats. What is going on?" Bill answered, "Boy, they are disappearing. I don't know. Maybe they are being caught and sent to the RSPCA or something. I don't know." It struck me kind of odd. Bill is an 80-year-old ex-military veteran, very calm. As we were sitting down, I heard little girls playing. Keep in mind it was raining and was cold. It was 11:30 p.m. also. All these factors piled up as alarm bells started going off in my mind. Then, out of nowhere, that awful stench came back. I got up recognizing it immediately and dropped my tea on the floor, breaking the mug in pieces, tugged on Bill's jacket, and told him to get inside and quickly. He was confused at first, looking at me with his blue eyes. He asked me, "Jesse, what is going on? You look like you saw a ghost." I told him, "This is more of a boogeyman, and it eats people. He is out here. He found me. We are both in danger." We went into the house and locked the door. I went and locked the other doors and latched the windows, locking them also. The stench thickened as we both gagged before Bill actually threw up. He looked at me and asked, "Is something trying to kill you?" "I think so. We can't let it get inside," I told him. Then we heard a little girl's voice. "Hello, can you please open the door? It is cold out here." This thing talks, and it knows how to imitate people. Bill wanted to open the door. I told him not to, that it was trying to trick us. We would have died if he opened the door. That I was sure of. The voice began to get guttural, very demonic.
"I know you are in there, Jesse. Did you miss me? Because I missed you? Just come on out. Leave the old man there. I don't need him. I just want you,"
it said. I knew it could get in if it wanted to. I told Bill to call 911 on his landline when he couldn't find his cell phone anywhere. Mine was in my car. The dispatcher asked what she could do for us. Bill told her that someone was trying to get in and that they had a weapon. She said for us not to let him in and help was on the way. It circled the trailer. We could hear footsteps continuously going around before it knocked on the front window and smiled. Bill saw it too. "What the hell? It's the devil!" he screamed. Its eyes glowed orange, and both of us saw its teeth and mouth drooling. We heard the sirens of the cruisers coming. It smiled and said,
"You won't be as lucky next time. Walls can't save you, neither will hiding."
It leaped the fence as if it was nothing, its legs long, powerful, and hairy, before it disappeared again into the dense trees. Police arrived. I was laid on the ground, handcuffed, and sat down in the chair until Bill came out and told them that I was with him. Then they let me go. He said the assailant fled into the group of trees on the far side. They went into pursuit. When we were questioned, we said it was someone dressed in black. We were not going to say that it was a monster that wanted to eat us. They would think we are crazy, maybe even charge us for false reporting. We packed some belongings for Bill, and I decided to take him with me to Sacramento. His life will be in danger if it decides to come back. It already said it will. I don't know where to begin. I'm scared now. Will I be one of those people missing without a trace and be forgotten? I do not know what to do. I need help. When we left, it was foggy. By the time we got on the freeway, it stopped raining. I think this thing has marked me. Please, I could use some advice. Jesse. It has been more than a month since the encounter at the trailer park. I live secluded in a small house now with my dog, Sabrina, a German Shepherd. Bill, my elderly friend from the previous encounter, disappeared and was found later in a portable restroom, dead, apparently from a heart attack. and he was missing a finger that had been torn off. It was never found. I didn't go forward to the police. What could I say? I've just stayed hidden. I'm terrified. My house is small. 1 bedroom, kitchen, and a small dining room, front and back exit. It is close to a river. It has a forest on the other side. I was reading a book from a collection I have in my small bookcase when I heard knocking on the front door. It was around 8 p.m. I was expecting a package of treats I had ordered for my dog and headed for the door. I opened it. No one was there. Sabrina was whining and started to growl. I closed the door, baffled, thinking maybe I'd heard something fall over from the wind. That all too familiar dread was beginning to creep back in. I was getting goosebumps on my whole body. Then Sabrina started clawing and barking at the back door aggressively. Someone slid a dirty piece of cloth from under the door. The smell, oh God, it was back. The cloth that was slid under the door held something, a bit of metallic weight. It was a ring I gave my elderly friend Bill a while back for his birthday. I broke down, horrified and heartbroken at the same time. Sabrina was at the back door now, growling, barking, and then whining. I could hear tapping now, intentional and rhythmic. I pulled out my phone and began dialing 911. I was alone, secluded, with only my dog. If that thing tapping wants to come in, it's going to come in no matter what, and we both will die this night. No one will hear us or know the truth about what happened. Suddenly, I heard a voice. "Jesse! Jesse!" It was mimicking Bill's voice. Tears now falling from my face, I yelled, "Leave me alone!" It was letting out a low, guttural growl when Sabrina ran and barked at the door. The doorknob turned, but luckily, I keep my doors locked. Then the door began to creak under the thing's monstrous strength as the frame cracked and broke. I dropped my phone and grabbed a bat I had next to the front door. I heard the back door burst open and ran around the corner to see Sabrina lunge at the thing and bite it in the leg. It backed up and looked at my dog as if seeing one for the first time. I swung the bat at it as hard as I could and hit it on the side of the face. It smiled, showing its rows of sharp teeth, and let out a low growl. I swung the bat again, striking it in the head as Sabrina tore at its leg. It suddenly turned to look as my phone, that was apparently on speaker, called out, "What is your emergency?" "Hello? Hello?" The creature looked hesitantly at it before it just turned and ran out the door. Sabrina started to run after it. I called after her, "No, girl, don't!" She looked at me and stopped, whimpering and barking at the thing as it tore off into the dark forest. I said to her, crying, tired, scared out of my mind, "Please don't leave me. I need you." I picked up the phone and spoke to the dispatcher. I told her that someone had got in and tried to hurt us. I told the officers when they arrived that someone in a costume tried to harm us. I gave a description, showed the damage on the door, and showed the bat to them I used on it. They took it as evidence. They said I could pick it up after their investigation. They were very skeptical and smiling when I was talking to them. Before they arrived, I took a swab of the bat with a Q-tip and put it in a small bag. There was a little of its blood, or whatever the black oozing substance was left on the bat. I gave it to a friend of mine who works at a hospital to hopefully analyze. I'll just have to wait a while for the results. In the meantime, Sabrina and I must stick together no matter what. I know it will be back again. The stench gives it away. We will be ready with a shotgun this time. Update on the sample sent to the lab, it came back as unknown, so I guess that didn't really answer anything. But my biggest question is, why does it speak? Nothing has helped so far. Why is it tormenting me? But if it bleeds, it can be killed, right? I am tired of living in fear of this. Update number 2. I think it got Sabrina. She is missing, can't find her. I hope she comes back. There are no signs of a struggle or other red flags. I am very worried. Please, Sabrina, come back. I will keep you guys informed. I am researching this thing. Most of what I've found talks about skinwalkers. My father's side of his family are from an Arizona Indian tribe. Update number 3. I found Sabrina. She was under a crawl space 3 houses down. She was very scared and did not want to come out. She had no injuries, but I had to call my neighbor friend to help me pull her out. She has been whimpering since we got her out. She was chased or ran away from someone or something, and very hungry. She is at home now, but she smelled horrible, and I had to give her a bath. After feeding her and cuddling with her, she calmed down some, thank God. Hello everyone. It has been a while since I have posted here. There will be some anonymity here. I will not disclose my city or leave a way for anyone to contact me. A few months back, I rescued my dog Sabrina from under a house crawl space. She was scared, hungry, and was under there for a few days. I had almost given up on the possibility of her being alive, until a neighbor of mine let me know she was down there. I nursed her back to herself in about a week, fed her, gave her a much-needed bath, took her to the vet. She came home with a clean bill of health, but shortly after she started to eat huge amounts of food, fought with other dogs, and became very aggressive. She even snapped at me also when I got too close to her food. Again, I took her back to the vet. A couple of months later, I found out she was pregnant. I was surprised that my little girl was having puppies. Again, a clean bill of health. Months passed, she gave birth, 3 puppies, 2 girls, 1 boy. The 2 girls did not make it, but the boy did. I kept him, and I named him Abbott. He was born deaf from 1 ear, but was very lively and always a happy puppy. He understood hand signals and some verbal commands, even as a small puppy at 2 months old. At the age of 6 months, he started showing signs of concern. His head was twice as big as a normal dog. His neck was thicker than a normal dog's, and his appetite was enormous too. But he is a very polite pup. I live with a roommate at a home I bought in the outskirts of my city. I would go to work and finish my day and come back and find the dogs outside, which was strange. The door would be open in the back. The fridge door would be ajar, with items neatly lined up next to the fridge, but no mess. Abbott would be sitting down on the back porch, wagging his tail and following me with a guilty look. I just shook my head and carried on with the rest of my day. But these occurrences became more and more frequent. I asked my roommate if he let them out and fed them. He would shake his head and say, no. Okay, what was up? It would happen again and again. I decided that I needed to find out why. The next morning, I said my goodbyes to my roommate, to Sabrina, and then Abbott. He just looked at me, following me with his stare as I left. I went out the door, got in my truck, and drove away. Went around the block, got in the back gate, opened the shed, and hid there waiting. A couple of hours later, I confirmed what I was worried about. The back door opened, Sabrina and the other dogs went out. Then Abbott. But Abbott was on his hind legs, creeping out, shutting the door with his hand-like paws. The skin on his paws retracted to form what looked like a baby's hand, but with claws. I fell back from the window, scared and bewildered. What is he? How is this possible? Sabrina is very protective of him. The main reason I am posting this is that Abbott entered my room while I was semi-asleep, ran his baby-like paws across my face, and exited my room, walking on his hind legs. Possessed, cryptic, or strange. I love my little boy. He is my whatever he is. He is my dog. He is my abbot. He loves me, and I am keeping him. My friends and I awakened something. From Anonymous. When I was 12, I lived in a small town in Oklahoma that barely earned the name town. We had a grocery store, a gas station, and a handful of houses scattered among dusty roads leading into stretches of woods. There wasn't much for kids to do, so we spent most of our free time outdoors. Some days that meant building forts out of scrap wood or skipping stones by the creek. Other days, we'd just roam for miles and miles, joking around and scaring each other with made-up ghost stories. That's how I ended up snipe hunting, and it's how we all ended up on the bad side of something we couldn't explain. It started with Clay, Darren, and Jeremy. They were the three troublemakers in my grade, always trying to top each other with the next great prank. I hung around them not because I was particularly brave, but because we were practically the only boys our age in the area. One afternoon, they cornered me in front of the school, joking about how they were going to go snipe hunting that weekend and asking if I dared to join. At that time, I had no idea what a snipe hunt was, except for some half-remembered mention in a Boy Scout manual. Clay grinned, showing crooked teeth. "We'll go Friday night, pack a flashlight, maybe a snack. We'll trick those little snipes right into our net." "Net?" I asked. "Yeah, sure, I guess." I didn't want to look like a coward. Looking back, I should have noticed their smug expressions. But I was clueless. Friday rolled around, and after dinner, I told my folks I was going camping with the guys. My mom offered me half a dozen warnings about not wandering too far, and my dad handed me a heavy flashlight, telling me to be careful. My toddler sister, Emily, waddled by and tried to grab my pant leg, babbling something about wanting to come. I ruffled her hair and told her I'd be back by morning. We met by the old baseball field at the edge of the woods, about an hour before sunset. Darren lugged a nylon bag, allegedly containing nets and small traps. Jeremy carried a few big jars he claimed were to catch the snipes once we cornered them. Clay, the ringleader, gave me a grin. "All right, buddy, you ready? Once it's dark, we'll lead 'em out into the open." I just shrugged, trying to hide my nerves. I had this slight prickling sense that something wasn't right. An hour later, we were deep in the woods. The sky turned pink, then orange, and finally a dusky purple. At some point, Clay announced we should split up, so I followed him while Darren and Jeremy went off on another trail. The plan, as Clay explained, was that we'd make noise and wave our flashlights around, flushing the snipes out of hiding. Maybe half an hour into this nonsense, Clay went quiet. I asked him if everything was okay, and he just snickered. Then he said, "Hey, do me a favor and hold my flashlight. I gotta tie my shoe." I obliged. He stooped down, fiddling with his laces. Next thing I knew, he sprang up, yanked his flashlight out of my grip, and ran. I stood there in shock, one flashlight left, my dad's. "Clay!" I yelled, but his footsteps were already vanishing among the trees. I figured it was a joke. They'd all dash away, leave me in the woods, and watch me freak out from a distance. Snipe hunt, classic kids prank. Well, I wasn't planning on giving them the satisfaction of seeing me panic. So I huffed and decided to head back to the rendezvous point by the baseball field. It would serve them right if I was just calmly waiting there when they came back, cackling about their trick. That's when I heard a growl. Not a dog's bark, not a coyote's yip, but a deep rumble from somewhere behind me. I froze, shining my flashlight in every direction. All I saw were shifting tree shadows, swaying branches, and the occasional glint of my light on leaves. No obvious movement, no sign of an animal. but my skin crawled. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe a raccoon rummaging around. But as I trudged forward, I heard something else, heavy breathing. Then a soft scrape, like claws on tree bark. Each time I whirled around, the sound stopped. Eventually, I broke into a jog, determined to get out of there. The entire forest felt alive, and not in a comforting way. I never got a clear look at anything that night. By the time I stumbled back to the baseball field, Clay and Darren were laughing, leaning against the chain-link fence, bragging about how they'd tricked me good. Jeremy stood off to the side, arms crossed, looking uneasy. Maybe he'd heard something out there too. Either way, we told them all they were jerks. They teased me a bit. Then we wandered home, calling it a night. That should have been the end of it, but we'd apparently riled something up out there. Over the next few days, weird things started happening. Darren swore he saw a hulking figure slink behind his dad's tool shed late one evening. Clay's sister woke up screaming because someone, or something, scratched at her window. Jeremy found the remains of a half-eaten possum in their backyard, its guts splayed out in a circle. I'd have guessed a fox did that, but I'd never known foxes to arrange their kill so systematically. At first, nobody linked it to our snipe hunt. We joked about how the local wildlife must be on a rampage, but the incidents got harder to brush off. One twilight, I caught a glimpse of something lurking among the pines behind our house. It was tall, gangly, but moved too fast for me to see more than a shape, like a silhouette. It slunk away the second I aimed my flashlight. That night, my sister Emily bawled for 2 straight hours, pointing at the window, muttering her baby words. My parents said it was just a nightmare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had actually been at the glass. 3 days later, Clay told us he followed footprints to a cave in the woods. He bragged about tracking this animal, leading him to a rocky outcropping half hidden by brush. He claimed he heard growling inside. We half expected him to say he saw some mythical beast, but he only admitted that he got too spooked to go in. A day after that, another neighbor discovered their family cat gutted on the lawn. The entire block started locking windows and doors more diligently. Folks whispered about cougars or bobcats, but nobody seemed certain. One evening, I was in my backyard, just after dinner. My parents were inside, and Emily was playing on a blanket, waddling around picking flowers. My mom always let her roam near the house as long as she could see her through the kitchen window. The sun was setting, and I was bouncing a basketball, half bored. That's when I noticed movement at the edge of the tree line, maybe 20 yards away. A dark shape, partially hidden by trunk and foliage, hunched low as if watching. My blood ran cold. My eyes flicked to Emily. She was obliviously playing with a dandelion. Then back to the shape, which seemed to sway slightly. I yelled, "Mom!" And as soon as my voice echoed, the thing vanished. My mother came out asking what was wrong, but by then there was nothing to see. She was annoyed, but I insisted I saw something. Emily, none the wiser, just giggled at the fuss. I spent a sleepless night trying not to think about that silhouette, and whether it had been creeping closer to my little sister. The next day, Jeremy found a mutilated raccoon on his porch. Its eyes were missing, and scratch marks covered the wooden boards. He told me this in a hushed voice on our way to school. "I think it's mad at us," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Whatever we did in those woods, it doesn't like it." Darren was next to see it, 2 afternoons later. He'd run to fetch a baseball that rolled into the bushes near his backyard fence. In the late afternoon light, he swore he locked eyes with a creature crouched behind a fallen log. He described it as having wide shoulders and long arms with coarse fur. But the face was more like a human's, elongated, with a flat nose. I only saw it for a second, he insisted, but it looked furious. He sprinted inside, and by the time he got his dad, it was gone. That same night, the screeching and scratching at windows reached a new peak in our neighborhood. Clay's brother had nightmares about the monster trying to open his bedroom door, though no one found physical evidence of that. For weeks, our parents assumed we were overhyping a series of normal events, a bobcat, raccoons, or maybe some sick coyote. But we knew better. We'd all seen too many glimpses, heard too many growls. The final straw came when Darren, trying to prove his bravery, decided we should chase it back to its cave. He coaxed us into the woods with flashlights one evening at dusk. After half an hour of searching, we heard a low moan echo through the trees, like an animal in pain, except with a weird, throaty resonance that gave us goosebumps. That was enough. We bolted without a word. And then, just like that, the encounters tapered off. The nighttime scratches stopped. No more gruesome carcasses appeared in yards. The shape in the pines behind my house never re-emerged. We were relieved, but I could tell we were changed. We jumped at every twig snap, every rustle in the bushes. Clay tried to downplay it, acting like we'd won some epic contest of wills. But I saw the way he checked behind him whenever we walked home from school. Jeremy started sleeping with the lights on. Darren, who'd always been the loudest, got quiet about the whole ordeal, as if speaking of it might lure the creature back. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'd developed an unease about the woods that never quite went away. Before our snipe hunt, the forest was my playground. Now it felt like potential danger lurked behind every trunk. Even if that thing had decided to leave us alone, the knowledge that it existed at all changed how I saw the world. A place that used to be ours for the taking was suddenly filled with secrets and threats. None of us ever told our parents the full extent. We weren't sure they'd believe us, or maybe we were too embarrassed to admit we'd messed with some creature we shouldn't have. What's clear is that something was out there, just as real as any coyote or mountain lion, but with a strange, almost human intelligence behind it. We triggered its anger, and for a while, it decided to make our lives miserable. Even now, when I visit home, I scan the tree line out of habit. The forest is still there, tall and quiet. Kids still ride bikes along the edge, and families still enjoy Sunday barbecues. But every time I pass that old baseball field, I remember Clay laughing, Darren carrying that nylon bag, Jeremy with his jars, and me clutching my dad's flashlight while hearing a growl that set my hair on end. We never caught a snipe. Instead, we found something else, something that reminded us how wild and unforgiving the woods can be, especially when you trespass in the wrong place and disturb the wrong thing. We walked away, but none of us walked away the same. Girl in the Woods, from BDP 33. When I was in high school, something happened to me that I still think about to this day. It's one of those experiences that sticks in your mind, no matter how much time passes. I've never been able to explain it, and even now, it makes my heart race just to think about it. Back then, my friends and I used to hang out at this old park near our school. It was nothing fancy, just a small playground with a few swings, a rusted jungle gym, and a clearing that backed up against a thick line of woods. We'd go there after class to unwind, laugh, and escape the stress of school for a little while. On this particular day, the sun was out, and everything felt calm. It was the kind of day where you'd expect nothing out of the ordinary. After a while of talking and joking around, I decided to go sit on the swings. I always liked the one at the end, the one closest to the woods. It faced away from the sun, and I liked how the shade of the trees made it feel a little cooler. As I sat there swinging, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the breeze wash over me. When I opened them, that's when I saw her. A little girl was standing just inside the tree line, barely visible among the shadows. She couldn't have been older than 4 or 5, with long, tangled hair and a pale dress that seemed to blend into the grayish-green hues of the forest. She was just standing there, staring at me. She didn't move, didn't say anything. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just her appearance that unnerved me. It was the way she felt out of place, like she didn't belong there at all. I blinked, and she was gone. The woods were empty, and everything seemed normal again. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I'd just seen. I told myself it was probably just my imagination, a trick of the light or maybe another kid playing hide and seek. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The next time we went to the park, I couldn't help but feel drawn back to that swing. Part of me wanted to see if it would happen again, though I wasn't sure if I wanted it to or not. I sat down and started swinging, facing the woods just like before. And just like before, I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, she was there again, standing in the same spot, staring at me with those unnervingly blank eyes. This time I didn't look away. I just sat there, staring back, as if I was trying to will her to move or do something. But she didn't. She just stood there, silent and still. When I finally worked up the nerve to turn around and call out to my friend Jessie, the girl disappeared again. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone, swallowed up by the shadows of the woods. I felt my chest tighten with fear and confusion. "Hey, Jessie," I called out, trying to sound casual even though my voice was shaky. "Come sit over here for a second." Jessie came over, and I told her to sit on the swing and close her eyes. I didn't explain why. I just wanted to know if she'd see the same thing I did. Jessie humored me, sitting down and doing as I asked. When she opened her eyes, she looked at me like I was crazy. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" she asked. I glanced toward the woods, half expecting to see the girl again. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows. "Never mind," I mumbled, brushing it off. "I thought I saw something, but I guess it's nothing." But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like something I couldn't explain. Jessie shrugged and went back to whatever she was doing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those woods were hiding something. Over the next few weeks, I tried to avoid sitting on that swing. I didn't want to see the girl again, but at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about her. What was she doing out there? Why did she keep appearing and disappearing like that? Was she real, or was my mind playing tricks on me? One afternoon, I finally gave in to my curiosity. I went back to the park alone, determined to figure out what was going on. It was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound. The breeze rustled the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint chirp of birds. But near the woods, it was almost eerily silent. I sat down on the swing, the one closest to the woods, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I wasn't surprised to see her standing there again. This time, I didn't look away. I studied her, trying to make out more details. Her dress was dirty and torn, and her skin looked pale, almost gray. Her hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and her eyes. There was something wrong with her eyes. They weren't just blank, They seemed empty, like they belonged to someone who wasn't really there. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just kept staring. I stood up, my legs shaking, and took a tentative step toward the woods. The moment I moved, she vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone, leaving only the shadows behind. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. For a moment, I considered walking into the woods to see if I could find her, but something deep in my gut told me not to. When I got home, I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing, but the fear lingered. It wasn't just the girl that scared me. It was the way she made me feel, like she was watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. I started avoiding the park altogether, and eventually, the memories of those encounters began to fade. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about her, wondering who she was and why she appeared to me. Years later, I learned that the woods near that park had a bit of a history. People talked about strange sightings, unexplained noises, and a general sense of unease that seemed to hang over the area. One story in particular stuck with me. Years ago, a little girl had gone missing in those woods. They never found her, and her disappearance became one of those local legends that people whisper about but never really discuss. Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder if the girl I'd seen was connected to her somehow. I'll probably never know what I saw in those woods. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was something more. All I know is that those encounters felt real, and they left a mark on me that I'll carry for the rest of my life. Even now, I avoid places like that, places where the shadows seem to stretch a little too long, and the silence feels a little too heavy. Because sometimes it's better not to know what's waiting for you in the dark. The Windigo of Kentucky. From Breeby3431. Hi, my nickname is B, as I prefer to be called that. 4 years ago, my boyfriend, who I will be calling W, and I went with my stepdad, sister, and brother-in-law to Campton, Kentucky, which, if most of you don't know, is right near Red River Gorge. Our cabin is right near the boundary of the park. We see black bears, mountain lions, coyotes, deer, and fox pretty frequently, and know what they sound like. I had told my sister and her husband about the Wendigo, about how they could mimic voices. I have a fascination with the unknown as well as urban legends from different cultures, as my grandfather's best friend is a tribe chief here in Indiana. When we arrived at our cabin, we took the side-by-side quad runner out, as well as the regular quad runner and my sister's Jeep, to show my boyfriend the trails he could take. My sister, thinking it would be funny, decided to start screaming Wendigo next to a graveyard from the 1800s we had discovered in the woods on the property. I felt a bone-chilling feeling go through my body. I have always felt that I was sensitive to the paranormal, as I would see things I couldn't explain. I told her to stop, and she continued doing it as if it was a joke. Fast forward to the next day, W and I decided to go out on the side-by-side to explore the trails. As we reached the Frog Pond Trail, I let him know to go at his pace, as the trails were slippery from a rainstorm we had gotten. As well as our caretaker, Reuben, had taken care of the trails, there could still be accidents. W and I started going down the trail slowly, but gained speed after a minute. Our side-by-side is a pretty loud quad, so it usually scares off whatever is in the area. After about 5 minutes, out of nowhere, I got that bone-chilling feeling shooting all through my body, and I had goosebumps on my arms. Keep in mind, it was the summer, so it was pretty hot. I started to look around to see if I could see any bears or an animal that could pose a danger to us. I couldn't. W noticed that I was looking around and asked, Do you feel it too?" I looked at him and nodded my head, asking him to stop so I could take over driving. We quickly stopped and switched. I felt more comfortable driving the quad runner in this situation because I knew the trails and knew which way to take. I sped up, throwing mud up as we went. The whole 1.5 miles through the trail, that feeling of dread never left my body. I was shaking. Later that night, my sister and her husband were out on what we call Stargaze Hill. They were in the Jeep. I had my thermal reader out and was pointing them at the trees near my sister, laughing with my stepdad about how the deer and coyotes never ran on that part of the trail. As I was scanning the edge of the woods closest to my sister, I noticed a tall, cold-looking figure standing in between 2 trees. It was impossibly tall, probably about 7 feet. It was thin, with oversized limbs and a weird head. That same feeling hit me, and I told my stepdad what I was seeing. But he just brushed me off. Not even 30 seconds later, the most blood-curdling and distorted screams sounded from the woods. My sister screamed, and they came flying back up to the house, my stepdad meeting them halfway on the quad with his gun in case something happened. The next day, Reuben came to the cabin, and W and I talked to him about the woods. Reuben said that there were parts of the woods that he would not step foot in, that he never felt welcome, and that he got a horrible feeling. I have not been back to that cabin since these incidents, and I don't think I will ever forget what happened. Possible skinwalker or weird dog creature. From Just Some Random Texan. For starters, I've known my best friend, let's call him Michael, for like 12 years now. And we have a routine where 1 or 2 nights a week, we will take a night drive in my convertible with the top down to go get food from whatever restaurant is open, usually Taco Bell. This night was really no different. However, we decided to go drive down some back roads too. At one point, we're way out in the sticks and are going down dark, tree-lined roads, which already look creepy enough. Then, as we went past a Y-shaped intersection, we catch a glimpse of golden yellow eyes, so I hit the brakes and backed up to see what it was. What we saw was probably the single creepiest thing I've ever seen. As I backed up, Michael yelled for me to stop, and he pointed his phone flashlight at it. But it wasn't needed to know something was off, because we could see its eyes without shining a light at them. When we did get the light on it, we got very afraid and confused. It was the size of a very big dog, but it was all wrong. Its fur was a matted mix of brown and gray. Its eyes were a glowing golden yellow, a bad cut on one ear, and the strangest part, its back legs were backwards, more like a human that was trying to stand like a dog. Then, suddenly, it started growling and walking towards us, and its movement was all wrong. Michael screamed for me to go, and I burnt rubber as I sped away from whatever that thing was. We discussed it after we got back to his house, and all we can think of is a skinwalker. Neither of us has ever seen anything like that. Voices in the Canopy. From Fractal Wizard. This is the story of an experience I had in Cradle Mountain National Park in Tasmania, Australia, in my early teens. Despite causing no physical injury, it has haunted me into adulthood. I grew up in a family of avid hikers. Both my mother, a botanist, and my father, a biologist for the University of Tasmania, would regularly visit the deepest wilderness areas of Tasmania during their field studies. These trips were disguised as camping and hiking adventures for the family. I never minded, as I was just as passionate about the outdoors as they were, even from a young age. Key word being was, as after what I went through even 20+ years later, I still refused to return. We lived on a property a short driving distance from Lake St. Clair, a popular tourist destination. This was the only place my parents would allow me to camp and experience the wilderness alone. as long as I brought my German Shepherd with me. He was a former police dog and very well trained. At 12 or 13 years old, I didn't mind. It felt like my own little slice of freedom in my own little slice of wilderness, despite being surrounded by people. It was easy to ignore them. But as I got older and more brazen, I found myself hounding my parents to let me take my quad bike deeper into the park to camp, to test my own abilities and prove to them that I was capable of doing so, and that I wasn't a little kid anymore. It was that overconfidence that led me to that situation and caused me this trauma. I was 15 at the time of the experience, at the age where I thought I was invincible, knew all there was to know, and was untouchable. After asking my parents for what felt like an uncountable number of times, and being told no just as many times, I had enough and decided to just go. I told my parents that I and a few friends were going to the lake to camp and do some fishing over the weekend. Instead, I took my tent, my quad, and headed into the reserve. I left just after sunrise to maximize daylight and to make it as far in as I felt comfortable. Once arriving, I set up camp, had some food, and decided to go for an explore. I knew of a spot nearby with a gorgeous rock face where fossils had been found in the past, so I thought I'd try my luck. Shortly into the walk, I realized I'd been turned around and had no idea where I was anymore. At the time, I didn't see it as that big of a deal, as I had a compass and knew that if I headed south, it would take me back to the lake, and I could walk from there. However, by this time, it was getting late in the afternoon. So, stupidly, I decided to try my chances and make it back to my camp and quad bike, so I wasn't walking back to camp from the lake in the dark. Big mistake. It was about 4:30 p.m., and the sun had begun to dip below the tree line, casting dark shadows across my walking path. That's when the forest went silent. And when I say silent, I mean silent. No wind, no birds, no forest sounds at all, which made my heart rate skyrocket. It was getting dark, and the silence was suffocating. I just wanted to get back to my camp, light a fire, eat some snacks, and spend my night watching nature's television until I fell asleep. That's when, from every direction, I would hear the sound of twigs cracking and something moving in the canopy above me. No big deal, probably birds or other small animals, I thought. But then, as clear as day, "Hey, come here!" At first, I felt relieved, as I thought someone along the trails had seen me, noticed I was a bit disheveled, and wanted to help. But looking around, I saw no one. Then it happened again, but behind me this time, the same voice. But I noticed it was coming from up in the trees. I responded, "I can't see you, where are you?" and asked for some help because I thought I just couldn't see the person calling out. But then it happened again, from to my left this time. That's when I decided to run. I took off into the brush and ran for a good 2 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath and look at my compass to start making my way towards the lake. I was terrified but felt I had covered enough distance that I wasn't in immediate danger. But seconds after checking my compass and starting to walk, I heard it again. "Hey, come here!" But this time it was right behind me. I spun around and saw absolutely nothing, so I began sprinting again and didn't stop. The last thing I heard before bursting out of the trees onto the lakefront was the most evil, demonic laugh I had ever heard. It sounded like 3 people laughing at once. I immediately called my parents to come and get me, told them what I did and what happened, but they were more focused on my disobedience than my experience. The moment they picked me up was the first time I felt relief, and I cried the whole drive home. I didn't sleep properly for days. My dad went and picked up my quad and tidied up my camp. Since that day, I haven't stepped foot away from the lake. If anyone has had an experience like this, I'd love to hear it, because it took my passion from me. I miss being out away from society, but I can't bring myself to do it. The Abandoned House in the Woods. From Anonymous. There's a house in the woods near where I live. Most people don't know about it, hidden as it is between the trees. But those of us who do, we know better than to get too close. I walk past it almost every day. There's a trail that winds through the woods, a shortcut between my neighborhood and town. Everyone around here uses it, cutting across the quiet stretch of land where the trees grow thick and the air seems just a little too still. If you take that trail often enough, you'll come across it eventually. A small, rotting house nestled in the trees, a place that shouldn't feel as wrong as it does. It's old, older than anything else in the area. The land it sits on belonged to a grand estate, one that still stands today, now operating as a historic hotel. But this house, this small, crumbling structure hidden in the woods, was different. It wasn't for the owners. It wasn't for their guests. It was for the workers. Back then, there were dozens of people working the land, living in shacks like this one. The main house, pristine and white, still towers over the town, preserved for history's sake. It's a tourist attraction now, full of old furniture, chandeliers, and polished floors. But the smaller house, the one that the workers lived in, was never meant to last. It was forgotten, abandoned, left to rot in the woods while the grand estate remained frozen in time. At least, that's what we thought. The first time I really noticed the house was when I was walking with my friends. We must have passed it a dozen times before, but for some reason that day it felt different. It pulled at us. I can't explain it, but we all felt it. The unspoken urge to stop, to look, to step just a little closer. We slowed our pace, glancing at one another. No one spoke, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. It was just a house, a broken, crumbling thing with rotting walls and shattered windows. And yet, I swear, the moment I laid eyes on it, something in my gut told me to turn back. I didn't listen. We walked up to it cautiously, stepping off the trail and through the overgrown grass. The air smelled stale, heavy with the scent of wet wood and old earth. The porch sagged under its own weight, boards bent and warped with age. A single window, its glass long since shattered, stared out like an empty eye. The closer we got, the more unnatural the silence became. The woods were never truly quiet. There was always the sound of wind through the branches, the rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of a bird or scuttle of a squirrel. But here, standing in front of that house, everything was still. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Anyone ever been inside?" one of my friends asked. No one answered. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered answering it myself. I could step onto that porch, push open the door, and peek inside, just for a second, just to prove that it was nothing but an abandoned shack. But before I could take a step, something moved. It was small, a flicker of motion, a shift of shadow just behind the broken window. It was so fast that for a second I thought I imagined it. But the way my friends tensed beside me told me they'd seen it too. What the hell was that? We stood there, waiting, listening. A breeze moved through the trees, stirring the dead leaves at our feet. The house groaned softly, as if shifting in place. But nothing else happened. Nothing else moved. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bird or a stray cat. Maybe the wind had caught something inside, made it shift just enough to trick our eyes. We told ourselves it was probably an animal. A raccoon, maybe. Something harmless. but as we turned to leave, someone muttered something that made my stomach twist. "Did you see the shape of it?" I didn't say anything, because I had. It hadn't been an animal. It had been something tall, thin, standing back just far enough to be a silhouette against the gloom. A person. But that didn't make sense. No one lived there. A cold feeling crept up my spine as I turned back for one last look. The window was empty now, dark and hollow. If something had been there, it was gone. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. That nagging, instinctual sense of being watched. We left quickly after that, pretending we weren't spooked, pretending we hadn't seen anything at all. But that was the first time I felt it watching. I tried not to think about the house after that first real encounter. Tried to push it out of my mind like a bad dream, just some weird trick of the light, an overactive imagination, something explainable, but I could still feel it. Even when I wasn't looking, even when I wasn't anywhere near those woods, the house lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow that wouldn't quite disappear. And I wasn't the only one. For the next few weeks, my friends and I made a point of walking the long way around, taking the extra 10 minutes to avoid passing by that broken thing in the trees. We never said we were avoiding it, but we all knew. Then, one day, someone broke the silence. "You guys saw it, right?" We were sitting in my backyard, the warm glow of late afternoon stretching over the grass. It was the first time we'd really talked about it since that day in the woods. No one answered right away. Finally, I nodded. "I don't know what it was," I admitted. "One of my friends, Liam, let out a breath like he'd been holding it for too long. I thought maybe I imagined it," he muttered. "But I knew it wasn't just me. It was tall, right? Way too tall." A chill ran through me. That had been bothering me too. The shape we saw wasn't normal. It was stretched, as if whatever it had once been, it wasn't anymore. No one said much after that, but the unease had settled into us like a weight. That night, when I tried to sleep, I dreamt of that broken house, of something watching through the empty window, waiting. Then the renovations started. At first, I thought it was a joke. Who in their right mind would want to fix up that place? But sure enough, one morning I cut through town and saw trucks parked at the trail's entrance. By the time we walked past later that week, the house looked different. Not better exactly, but altered. Some of the rotting boards had been stripped away. Tools leaned against the side of the house, and a new door had been propped up beside the entrance. "It looks worse," someone muttered. And they were right. The house hadn't felt safe before, but now it was different, like something was angry. The changes kept coming. The broken windows were cleared out, the sagging porch reinforced with new beams. Some days we'd pass by and hear the workers talking, hammering, laughing. Normal, everyday sounds that should have made the place feel less unnatural. But they didn't. And then, one day, they just stopped. It happened overnight. One day we saw ladders propped up against the roof, cans of paint stacked neatly beside the door. The next day, everything was gone. No tools, no materials, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. The house looked exactly as it had the first day we saw it. Rotting, crumbling, empty, as if the renovations had never happened. A cold dread settled over me as we stood there, staring at the unchanged ruin. My heart was pounding, though I couldn't explain why. "I don't like this," Liam said. No one argued. We left, walking a little faster than usual. The final time we saw it, I should have left it alone. I know that now. But something about the way the house reset itself stuck with me. It made no sense. I had seen the changes happening, watched them haul in supplies and install new panels. I had heard the workers, spoken to them once when I passed by alone. And yet, it was like they had never been there at all. I couldn't let it go. One evening, just before sunset, I decided to go back, alone. The woods were different at dusk. The sunlight cut through the trees at sharp angles, stretching shadows across the forest floor. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of leaves beneath my feet, the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. The house stood just as I had left it, unchanged, waiting. I don't know what I expected to find, but standing there, I felt something shift. The air pressed in around me, thick and still. I truly felt like I wasn't alone. I took a step closer. A floorboard creaked inside the house. I froze. Another creak, this time near the window. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe the house was settling. And then, slowly, something moved into view behind the shattered glass. I stopped breathing. It was tall, taller than the window itself, shoulders hunched to fit within the frame. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. A hollow face, empty where features should have been. It was watching me. I don't remember running, only the sheer need to get away. My feet pounded the dirt path, lungs burning as I tore through the trees. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, my chest ached and my vision swam. But I didn't stop until I was back in town, surrounded by streetlights and the hum of passing cars. I never went back after that. Neither did my friends. Even now, years later, I don't know what I saw. Maybe the house was never really abandoned. Maybe it never wanted to be found. Maybe, just maybe. Some places refuse to be changed, and some things refuse to leave. It was trying to take me over. From Anonymous. I've always loved to walk. There's something freeing about it. The steady rhythm of my steps, the cool air against my skin, the way the world feels quieter when it's just me in the road. Walking gave me time to think, to breathe, to exist outside of the noise of everything else. But after what happened that autumn, I don't walk alone anymore. It was late October of 2017, and the mornings were getting colder. I lived in Washington State, where rain was a near constant companion, and every morning I walked 2 miles to school. At first, I didn't mind it. The drizzle became background noise, the damp air something I had learned to tolerate. I had even become something of a known figure at school, the girl who walks to school every day. It wasn't a title I had asked for, but I didn't mind. Then the fog rolled in. It was heavier than usual, thick like smoke, curling around the trees and swallowing the road. It settled early, before the sun even had a chance to rise, stretching its way through the town like something alive. I remember the first morning I noticed it, the way it clung to my skin, damp and heavy, as if pressing down on me. It made the world feel smaller, darker. My usual route felt different that day. The road, once familiar, stretched endlessly into the mist. I could hear my own breathing, my own footsteps, but everything else was muffled. And then there was the feeling. It started as a whisper of unease, a faint, nagging sensation at the back of my mind. The further I walked, the stronger it became. An electric charge in the air, something unseen and wrong pressing against me. I wasn't alone. I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks, but my instincts knew better. The road I walked was mostly empty. just a few houses near the beginning. But as I went deeper, the homes gave way to dense forest. In the winter, it was beautiful. In the fog, it was something else entirely. I was nearly halfway to school when I saw it. A figure, barely more than a shadow, standing up ahead. At first, I thought it was a person, a fellow early riser, maybe another student. But something was off. It stood too still, its edges blurred by the mist. The moment I blinked, it was gone. My breath hitched. I kept walking, my pace quickening. Maybe it had been nothing. A tree, a trick of the light, my mind making shapes out of the fog. Then I saw it again. Closer this time. A dark silhouette, just out of reach. A chill ran down my spine. There were no streetlights on this stretch of road. No reason for shadows to stretch and move the way this one did. And yet, every time I blinked, it was somewhere new. I wanted to run. Instead, I forced myself to keep walking. By the time I reached the school parking lot, the feeling had lessened, but it didn't disappear completely. Even inside the building, surrounded by classmates and teachers, I could still feel it, lingering just outside the walls. Watching. The next morning, the fog was worse. I had barely stepped outside when the dread settled into me. The mist coiled around my ankles as I walked, thick enough that I couldn't see the ground beneath me. The air was damp, suffocating, and the silence was even heavier than before. I didn't want to go, but I had no choice. Halfway through my walk, it returned. This time, I didn't just see it. I felt it. A presence, thick and suffocating, wrapping around me like invisible hands. The shadow stood further down the road, waiting. I stopped. The air turned colder. Something inside me screamed to turn back, to run home, to do anything but keep walking. But I couldn't move. The mist curled around the figure, distorting it. The more I looked, the more I realized. I couldn't make out any details. No eyes, no face, nothing human. Just darkness. And then it shifted. Not like a person stepping forward, but like something slipping through space, collapsing and reforming in an instant. It was closer. My heart pounded against my ribs. I took a step back. The moment I moved, it vanished. The suffocating pressure lifted. The air was still thick with unease, but the shadow was gone. I didn't wait around to question it. I ran the rest of the way to school. By the third day, I knew it wasn't going away. The fog came with it, a shroud thick enough to choke out the sun. I could feel the presence clinging to me, pressing into my skin like a stain I couldn't wash off. It wasn't just on the road anymore. It was with me, around me, following me home. It clung to my clothes, my walls, my bed. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it, that it was just lingering fear, nothing real. But then my things started moving. Books knocked over, doors left open that I had closed. My bedroom light flickering, my reflection in the mirror looking off. Just for a second, just enough to make my stomach twist. It wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside. I could feel it, curling into the corners of my room, sinking into the walls. That was when I finally told someone. My sister didn't hesitate. She smudged the house with sage, moving through the rooms with purpose, muttering under her breath. I didn't understand the words, but I didn't need to. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter. The pressure lifted, and for 3 blissful days I felt normal again. I could sleep without feeling eyes on me. I could walk without the weight of something pressing against my back. For 3 days I let myself believe it was over. I was wrong. It came back, and this time it was angry. After my sister smudged the house, the air felt lighter. The oppressive weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying was gone. I could walk into my room without feeling like something was waiting in the corners. I could sleep without that suffocating sense of being watched. For the first time in weeks, I felt normal, and then, on the fourth day, it came back. This time it wasn't content with watching. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I froze. My room was dark, the kind of deep, suffocating darkness that felt wrong. My curtains were open. I always left them that way. But there was no light outside. No moon, no streetlights, just blackness pressing against the window pane. Something was in the room with me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, the air thick and heavy pressing against my skin. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I strained to listen. The house was silent, and then, from the foot of my bed, a breath. Not mine. A slow, deliberate inhale. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My limbs were locked in place, my chest tight, with an invisible pressure that grew heavier with each passing second. Sleep paralysis. It had to be. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force my body to wake up, to break free. But even with my eyes closed, I felt it shifting closer. A shadow pressing against the edges of my consciousness. A whisper of movement. And then, the pressure changed. It wasn't just weighing me down anymore. It was pushing inside. A cold, crawling sensation slid up my arms, my chest, my throat. My own breath hitched, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My skin felt like it didn't belong to me anymore, like something else was testing the edges of it, seeing if it could fit. It was inside me. I wanted to thrash, to fight, to do something, but I was trapped, sinking into the mattress as something pressed deeper, trying to take up space where I was. No. I forced the word into my mind, repeating it over and over, clinging to it like a lifeline. No. 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 The pressure wavered. The thing inside me hesitated, recoiling slightly as if realizing I was resisting. I clung to that small shift, forcing every ounce of my will against it, pushing it back. I imagined myself forcing it out, shoving it away with everything I had left. And then, all at once, the weight lifted. I gasped, my body jerking upright as I finally regained control. My room was empty, but I wasn't alone. The corner of the room just past the edge of my bed. It was standing there, a shape darker than the darkness, tall and skeletal, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It wasn't breathing, wasn't moving, just watching. My throat burned, but I forced the words out anyway. "Get out!" The thing didn't flinch. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam of light cut across the room, and there was nothing there, just an empty corner. But I knew it hadn't left. Not really. The next day, I didn't go to school. I barely left my room. I could still feel it inside, the ghost of that pressure, the lingering wrongness, like something had tried to wear my skin and almost succeeded. I told my sister everything. This time, she didn't just smudge the house. She called someone. An older woman arrived at our house that evening, someone my sister knew but I had never met before. She carried a small pouch of dried herbs and a bottle filled with something that smelled sharp and bitter. She didn't ask me questions. She didn't need to. She walked through the house, stopping every few steps to murmur something under her breath. When she stepped into my room, she stopped completely. "It's been here for a long time," she said. My stomach twisted. What has? The woman turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. The thing that tried to take you. I felt a wave of nausea. It's not a ghost, she continued. Not a person that died and stayed behind. It's older than that. It doesn't want revenge. It doesn't even hate you. She tilted her head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. It just wants a body. A chill rolled through me. Can you get rid of it? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt down, pulling something from her pouch. A bundle of dried sage, bound with twine. A small vial of oil. She traced something into the floor with the oil, symbols I didn't recognize. And then she began to speak. Not English. Something older. The air in the room changed. It wasn't cold, but it was wrong, like the pressure of a storm about to break. I heard something creak, the walls groaning under an invisible weight. The lights flickered. I sucked in a breath as a shadow pooled in the corner of the room, stretching, growing. And then it screamed. It was a pressure against my skull, an unbearable twisting sensation behind my eyes, something raw and furious and starving. And then, silence. The air settled. The weight lifted. The woman let out a slow breath. It's gone. I stared at her, my body still shaking. Are you sure? She nodded. But be careful. I swallowed hard. Why? She gave me a long, steady look. Because it knows you now. It's been years since that night. I never saw the thing again. But sometimes when I walk alone, I still feel it. A whisper of something in my shadow. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. It doesn't come close anymore. Not since it failed. But I know it's still waiting. Because things like that don't just disappear. They wait for the right moment, and they try again. The Stalker. From James. I'm a 26-year-old male. I live in Ireland, and nothing really ever that bad happens. This happened about 6 or 7 years ago when my friend Donald and I decided to go to a rural area. And if you're wondering why we randomly decided to do this, it's because we went there often. We loved exploring empty and dead places. So we looked up creepy places in Ireland. And this forest comes up and was only about 48 miles away from where I lived. I always brought a pocket knife just in case anything happened. When we finally got there, I grabbed my bag and we started walking into the forest. And almost the second I went into the forest, I got the feeling that someone was watching us. I tried to shrug it off and kept on walking. About 30 minutes later, I hear a twig snap. I look behind me. No one there. I still thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. But then Donald whispers, "James, come over." Since he is whispering, I think something must be up. He points over to this bush, and there is a man in his mid-50s who is looking in the other direction. But then Donald steps on a twig. It makes a loud noise. The man looks over at us and makes the creepiest grin I've ever seen in my life. It's at this point that I get the overwhelming urge to escape the situation. For a second, neither of us move, and then suddenly I'm running, but I don't hear Donald trailing behind. I glance over my shoulder. He's tripped and fallen over. I sprint back to him. He has really hurt his ankle. But the man is catching up to us. I lift Donald up and half carry, half drag him through the woods. I could tell we were getting very close to our car, as I started to recognize a few landmarks we'd passed on the way in. Another minute or two, and we make it to the car. I throw Donald in the back seat and jumped in. Of course, the piece of junk decides to give us trouble starting now, of all times. The man comes out from the woods and looks at us with that absolutely demonic grin. Thank God the thing finally cranks and the engine roars to life. I slam my foot on the gas and don't slow down until we're at least 10 miles away. I drop Donald off at his house, and I help him in, and I drive home. By the time I'm getting ready for bed, it's about 3 a.m. I close my eyes and go to sleep. Suddenly, I'm woken up by a tapping noise on my window. I glanced at my clock and see it's 5 a.m. Who would be tapping at my window at this time? I hesitantly open the blinds. It's the same man who was chasing us in the woods. I feel like throwing up as I back away. Then he says, "You forgot something," and lifts up my backpack. I scream at the top of my lungs. My parents run in, my dad frantically asking, "What is it?" The man runs away from the window as all the commotion unfolds, and I hear a car speeding off into the dark. Beware a yellow tinge in their eyes. From Everyone Loves a Montana Girl. My encounter happened in western Montana during a full moon, reinforcing my decision not to go out during one. You never know who you might encounter. To give a little insight about my family, my father's side is a blend of Scottish, Kootenai, and Nez Perce heritage. The founding patriarch of the family immigrated from the Scottish Highlands from an old, well-known clan, while the founding matriarch was the niece of a famous Nez Perce chief. To say my family's roots in western Montana run deep is an understatement. With that, there's a long history of hearing, dreaming, seeing, and even feeling the supernatural. I've always sensed energy and emotions, joy, pain, anger, and even hatred. If the vibes are off, I pick up on it immediately. Having this insight or gift means that people, all kinds of people, see me as a beacon and are often drawn to strike up conversations. I've had countless conversations with strangers, often finding myself as their makeshift therapist in the grocery aisle or at a neighboring gas pump. While it can be annoying when I just want to be left alone, I try to grant people grace because, again, you never know who you might encounter. One Friday night, after a long 10-hour shift and 2 hours of overtime, I was exhausted, but decided to make a quick trip to Albertsons. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed the full moon. In Montana, the size and color of a full moon vary greatly, and on that particular night, the sky was starless and pitch black, with the moon casting a low, eerie yellow glow. A voice in my head said, "Tonight might not be a good night to go out." I shrugged it off. In the store, I quickly gathered my snacks for the weekend and felt relieved that I hadn't run into anyone chatty. The chip aisle is usually where I'm most likely to encounter talkative strangers, so I considered it a small victory. I checked out, grabbed my bags, and reached for my receipt when the atmosphere shifted. It felt heavy and unpleasant. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed 2 store employees walking with a scruffy-looking man. Our town often has transient people, especially depending on the season. They're generally harmless, just down on their luck, and this man seemed to fit that description. As I left, he ended up walking alongside me. He made small talk, and I responded politely. Then he asked if he could look at my eyes. That caught me off guard, and instinctively, I looked up. He was filthy, with tattered clothes and a sickly yellow tinge to his skin. His irises were so dark they appeared black, and the whites of his eyes had a hideous yellow tint. The sight made the hairs on my neck stand up. Growing up, I was taught never to whistle or interact with strangers at night, especially if they asked your name or insisted on eye contact. Signs that might indicate a skinwalker or soul stealer trying to possess you. One key identifier was that unnatural yellow hue in the whites of their eyes. Realizing what I might be dealing with, my fear turned to anger. I squared up and replied, "My eyes are green, nothing special." It felt like my instincts were pushing me to show that I wasn't afraid. He gave a sly, unsettling smile, revealing brown, rotted teeth. "You know," he said, "your eyes are special. People with green eyes can look into other souls and see evil. Hold on to them." Without hesitation, I replied, "They'll be with me until I turn to ash." His smile faded slightly, and he chuckled before replying, "Good. Stay safe out there. A lot happens during a full moon." Then he walked off in the opposite direction, towards the thick surrounding trees. I hurried to my car, threw my groceries inside, and left, but anger and curiosity got the best of me. I circled the parking lot for one last look, my headlights sweeping the well-lit commons area shared by Albertsons and other stores. He was simply gone. There were no shadows behind pillars or storefronts, and he couldn't have left without me seeing or hearing him get into a car. But as I checked the final row, the area was empty. If he'd been anywhere nearby, I would have seen him. I realized then that I'd encountered something truly evil and called my dad as I drove home. He was alarmed and told me to smudge myself as soon as I got back. Smudging is a practice where you burn a special dried plant or grass and waft the smoke around yourself, items, or spaces. By the time I reached home and performed the ritual, the eerie feeling began to fade. I spent the rest of the night cuddled with my big Labrador retriever for comfort. Thankfully, the man did not invade my dreams, and I haven't seen him since. I still visit that grocery store, but you won't catch me there on a full moon. Ring of Fire, from Shiv 76. When I was a theater studies student in the Midlands of England, we had to take our little theater company on tour around the local rural countryside as part of the practical side of the course. Being a proper London girl, I wasn't best pleased with the prospect of roughing it in a 10-person van. There were 15 of us in the company. But for the sake of my art, I stopped being a silly tart and threw myself in it with enthusiasm. One day, we broke down in the middle of nowhere, and by the time the AAA bloke got to us, and in turn, by the time we got to the campsite, there was no room left for us. We had 3 performances locally the next day, and by this time it was already 8, and it was pitch dark almost. We didn't have many options left open to us. Our director said it would be best if we drove the van into the nearby forest and all slept in the van for the night, as it was too late to continue driving around, and we had an early start the following day. We reluctantly agreed. We found a quiet part of the forest that was open with not many trees, and by 9:30 we were settled in the van, if a little cramped and cold. We were all 19 and 20-year-olds, and we saw it as a big adventure. At around 11:30, I was stirred awake by one of my colleagues screaming, and another bloke saying, "This is so bad. We are so screwed." To my complete horror, through my sleep-blurred eyes, I saw that our little van was completely surrounded by about 50 what appeared to be farmers, all with homemade torches burning brightly. I started panicking but didn't scream. I couldn't take my eyes off the men. They weren't moving an inch, didn't have any expression on their faces, not even when we honked the horn at them. 2 of our group even got out of the van and shouted at the men, to the total horror of everyone else. They didn't react at all. Needless to say, we were all terrified. Every time we tried to move the van, the men moved a step forward to block us. And then at 1:30, all the men suddenly just turned around and walked away through the trees. We were absolutely exhausted, but we moved a little further on with nowhere to go at the moment. We took turns in keeping watch, fearing the men would find us, but they didn't. The Woman by the Lake, from Neptide. My father never talks about that day. Even now, years later, when the conversation turns toward strange encounters and childhood fears, he refuses to elaborate. He'll go quiet, his face unreadable, and shake his head as if it's something best left forgotten. But once, when I was young, I asked him why he hated the lake near our hometown so much. And for the first and only time, he told me the story. It happened when he was 12. Back then, the lake wasn't completely off limits, but people avoided it. There were rumors, stories passed down from old folks who swore something wrong lived in those waters. Some claimed it was cursed. Others said a witch had made it her home long ago, and those who trespassed risked waking something that should have been left alone. But my father and his younger brother didn't believe in those stories. To them, the lake was just another place to explore in the woods. That day, the two of them had skipped school with a few friends, making their way through the woods to the water's edge. The lake was silent when they arrived. Too silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the soft lapping of water against the shore. Still, they ignored the eerie stillness, running along the bank, tossing rocks into the water, daring each other to wade deeper. That's when my father noticed the woman. She stood at the far side of the lake, partially hidden by the trees. At first, he thought she was just a villager, someone passing through. But there was something off about her. She was dressed in rags, layers of dark, tattered fabric that clung to her thin frame. Her face was pale, almost sickly, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were a deep, burning red. But that wasn't the worst part. In one hand she held something small, bright against the dullness of her clothing. A piece of candy, deep red, glistening in the light. She was holding it out, beckoning, and she was looking directly at my uncle. My father froze. His little brother, just 6 years old at the time, took a hesitant step forward. "Ask her for one," he said, his voice small and curious. A chill crawled up my father's spine. Something was wrong. He grabbed his brother's wrist, pulling him back. "No," he whispered. That's when the woman spoke. Her voice was low, unnatural, like the wind slipping through dead branches. "I only need a little of his blood." My father's breath caught. The woman took a step forward, shifting slightly, and for the first time, he saw what she was hiding behind her back. A long, rusted blade, curved and jagged, dark with something thick and wet. That was enough. Without another thought, my father ran. He yanked his brother's arm, nearly dragging him as he sprinted away from the lake, his feet pounding against the damp earth. The trees blurred past him, branches clawing at his clothes. The sound of his own breath roared in his ears. But just as they neared the edge of the woods, he risked a glance over his shoulder. She was following them. Not running, not walking, gliding. Her feet never touched the ground. Her body twisted through the trees, her red eyes burning through the shadows. And in her hand, the blade dripped. Somewhere in his mind, my father knew the woods weren't endless. If they just kept going, they'd reach the road, reach safety. Then suddenly, the trees broke open, and they were free. They stumbled onto the dirt path, their lungs burning, the midday sun blinding after the suffocating dark of the forest. Only then did my father dare to turn around. But the woman was gone. The woods were still. The lake, just barely visible through the gaps in the trees, rippled gently, as if nothing had ever happened. Neither of them spoke the whole way home. That night, my father dreamt of her. She stood at the foot of his bed, watching. Her mouth stretched into a too wide grin, her teeth dark and jagged, and in her hand, the rusted blade dripped onto the floor. He woke up shaking, a whisper curling through the room. I'll come back for him. He never returned to the lake after that, and neither did his brother. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at Prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.